far. We would love for you to tweet and post on social media using the hashtag NTheoryCon2020. So welcome to our lunchtime panel, the new Frontlines, Reshaping Newsrooms in Asia and around the world. So this year, 2020, redefine newsrooms and news reporting around the world. The coronavirus pandemic upended the news business and fundamentally changed how we deliver the news. So my name is Zella Chin. I'm the Executive Vice President for the AAJA-Asia chapter, and I will be your moderator today. So with me are Ken Moritsugu. He is the Greater China News Director for the Associated Press. He's based in Beijing. We have in Hong Kong, Tracy Alloway. She is the Asian News Desk Executive Editor at Bloomberg. Also in Hong Kong, we have Brian Rhodes. He's the Managing Editor of the South China Morning Post. And last but not least, we have Adrienne Wong. She's the Vice President of International News Gathering at NBC News, and she's dialing in from London. So thank you guys for joining me. We are going to start off with Ken. So our panel is about how coronavirus has changed how newsrooms work and our reporting. So you're based in China, sitting in Beijing. When did you notice the coronavirus story in Wuhan was going to be a big story? And how did the AP team react to that?
January, that there was a new virus was kind of coming. There's some reports about a SARS-like virus that that had come out, and we reported it because it was SARS-like, and we were worried, we were concerned it could become something, but then it kind of died down for a bit, and it wasn't as we now know, as we've learned, as we know now. It kind of went quiet. The government kind of went quiet and everything. And then I would say, I'm trying to remember, the third or fourth week of January, the numbers started going up. All of a sudden there were 5 cases, 10 cases, 20 cases, 30 cases, and we're like, something might be happening here. And I think the first thing we did was I think it was a Monday, they shut down Wuhan on Wednesday. And on Monday, we said, we better get someone into Wuhan. Let's see what's going on. And let's get in ahead of everybody else if we can. So we went there for a couple days. And then we pulled out literally hours before the city shut down. So I think it was that last week of January when things really started just sort of incrementally growing. And then all of a sudden there was, the big lockdown announcement at 3 in the morning Beijing time that really told everybody this was a huge story.
Yeah, definitely watching in Hong Kong. I remember I probably noticed end of November and early December when we're talking to my mainland Chinese colleagues about what we're going to do. I was going to go home for Christmas, and she's actually from Wuhan. She was like, well, I'm not going to Wuhan for Chinese New Year. She's going to meet up with her family elsewhere instead. But so, yeah, coming to Hong Kong, Brian and Tracy are both here. At what point, I guess I'll go with Brian first. At what point did your network realize that this was going to be an important story to cover? And what did you do to protect your reporters?
Yeah, there was a realization. Well, we published a story around the end of the year saying that one of the spikes, early spikes that happened, some kind of atypical pneumonia. We have a lot of veterans in our newsroom who've lived through and covered SARS. I happen to be in Beijing working for Reuters at the time, but others here in our Hong Kong newsroom have experienced covering that outbreak here in Hong Kong. So there was plenty of institutional knowledge. The first thing we did was we put together a little cheat sheet on what atypical pneumonia was and some directions to staff on how it spreads, what to get. It just brief stuff for the reporters who were going out to the front lines on like Ken was. And we weren't like anybody. We weren't sure exactly what it was. Meanwhile, because I'm a hypochondriac and super paranoid, I think I stocked up on masks and hand wash sometime around January 2nd or 3rd, just in case. And it turned out to be lucky. But meanwhile, the list of do's and don'ts for the staff as they went out to cover the story, everyone knows them today. Wash your hands, wear a face mask, don't touch things in common areas, railings and elevator buttons. Like that. But like Ken, the minute the lockdown was announced, we had to pull everybody out and bring everybody back to Hong Kong. And then it was clear that something bigger was at work and that we would need to start working to shore up the home office.
Yeah, so I want to ask Tracy that actually. So Tracy, you're in Hong Kong as well, and you saw the story unfolding in China and across the Asian region, you know, Taiwan, Hong Kong. At what point did Bloomberg think that this is a big issue, not only as a story, but also we need to fundamentally change how our newsroom operates, and what changes you guys make?
Sure. So I think it's important to remember that the crisis sort of unfolded at different times across the region. For Hong Kong, I remember very clearly it was Chinese New Year when we decided that actually this is a huge thing and we're going to tell everyone in our office to work from home. And a lot of people have basically been working from home since that point. Now, the great thing about having reporters and editors and production staff scattered around the entire Asia region is that we can sort of direct resources away from Hong Kong into places like Singapore and Beijing at that time. Those offices were still up and running. So we were able to rely on them as we shifted some reporting resources away from Hong Kong. So that was really useful. In terms of actually figuring out when it was a big story, I think it was very clear from January onwards that it was a huge issue for Asia. What was really interesting from a global perspective is just how long it took for readership to really sit up and pay attention to what was going on. So I don't know if anyone remembers what was playing on a lot of the US media in January and February, but it was all Trump and Russia. There was so little on the coronavirus crisis. It didn't really explode into the public consciousness until March, I think. And meanwhile, we at Bloomberg in the Asia region were really trying to promote the stories as a global issue, especially for our clients. They're very concerned with what's going on in the global economy. They've been worried about US-China trade tensions for 2 years, and yet we had a huge chunk of the Chinese economy basically shut down for coronavirus. And it didn't really seem to be resonating with anyone in the market just yet. So there was a sort of weird transition period in time between when this was a huge issue for Asia and before when it exploded into the global consciousness, I'd say.
Yeah, so that brings me to Adrian. You're in London and you manage 100 journalists around the world. So, but as Asia was dealing with this, and then Europe and the US, what sort of rules do you give to your news gathering teams? And how does that affect the reporting?
Yeah, mute.
Sorry about that. So like the other panelists mentioned, you know, we took safety considerations into right away. So we had our Asia team in Wuhan as well, just around the time the city started to shut down. And fortunately, they left before they got caught up in that. It's funny what Tracy was saying about not remembering what the US news organizations were really focused on, but January was a crazy news month. If you remember, we started off the year with the big wildfires in Australia. You had the Soleimani killing in Iraq. You had this whole potential confrontation with Iran, the downing of the Ukrainian airliner, Kobe Bryant's death in the US, and of course, US politics. So there was a lot going on, and it was very hard to get traction. But we were very focused on our team in Asia because they were contributing to many of our different platforms, even in January, end of January, I think. And it was the slow wave that sort of crept up through Europe. And I think when it hit Italy, that's when people in the States started to really sit up and wanted more coverage. From a health and safety perspective, you know, we were still doing the same sort of things, kind of looking at every local situation, making those assessments. It did actually take a while to get some of our corporate colleagues to focus. Even though we're a big international company, the folks in the US hadn't really concentrated their energy there. Same with some of the colleagues in London. So it did take a little bit of time, just like Tracy said. I think probably around early March, mid-March, people really started to sit up, and there became this very concerted effort to standardize our health and safety across the board. Again, making allowances for every country because every country was responding differently.
So it sounds like many of your newsrooms have been doing work from home in various forms across 8 months or so. So Tracy, going back to you, how are your reporters reporting if they're working from home?
Sure. So I think one thing we've learned from this crisis is probably just how much of our lives are already sort of dictated and controlled by technology. So, the notion of reaching out to someone by email is not unfamiliar to anyone at this point. The idea of conducting Zoom calls, chats, instant messaging chats, Twitter direct messages, things like that. All of those communications channels exist and certainly have been put to more use in recent months. There are some complications and some concerns with using digital methods of reporting and communication. Obviously, for sensitive conversations, person to person is always best. So that's been a challenge, and a lot of our reporters have become recent experts in encrypted communications and things like that. But I would say it hasn't been too difficult. And the other interesting thing about this particular crisis is once Wuhan was shut down, just how much of the information was coming out from Wuhan citizens and residents themselves. And that's also been an interesting trend, the sort of reliance on almost sort of, what do you call it, citizen journalism, I suppose. There have been a lot of pieces of footage, anecdotes, things like that that have been coming up from the ground from non-journalists that we've been able to verify and use. So I think that's been an interesting development as well.
So in our rehearsal, we also mentioned some of your reporters don't go to hospitals, right? They're not put in danger situations, and there are certain restrictions placed on reporters at this time. You can't get so close to your interviewees and to your sources. So Ken, I wanted to ask you, do you feel maybe some of the coverage was lacking in some areas?
I don't know if it was the lacking. I think the biggest challenge was how do you cover a story where you can't go to cover it, meaning that Wuhan and all of Hubei province was shut down, and essentially you couldn't get in, and if you managed to get in, you couldn't get out. And so I think, as Tracy was saying, there were a lot of creative ways we had to come up with to get at the story and tell the story, particularly visually, right, in terms of photos and videos and whatnot. And so we, like Bloomberg, we contacted a lot of citizen journalists. We actually wrote about the citizen journalists because they were a big story in and of themselves, of people who went in there to get the story out initially, kind of thing. Who maybe not so much just regular people, but people actually have a mission to be kind of a storyteller. But then beyond that, of course, in this era of social media, everybody's posting their videos on social media. So we're of course trolling, or I don't mean trolling in that sense, but going through social media, trying to find people who will talk to us, who will tell us their stories, what happened in these videos. We also did some interesting video stories just using the Douyin, the TikTok equivalent in China. People posted these 15-second videos of their lives under what they were doing to have fun under lockdown, kind of thing. We found 5 of them and sort of put them together as a visual story that just sort of got out, but we couldn't do ourselves. We couldn't get in there and do it ourselves. So it was challenging in a lot of ways, and I think as getting the human element into the story was always a very challenging part of telling the story. And I'm sure if we'd been there, we would have been able to do even more. But we were able to do quite a lot just by using social media and video interviews, remote video interviews, and so forth.
So Brian, your team at the DSCMT has been working from home off and on for 8 months now. How do you manage them? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, we this has been an interesting time to be a journalist. We shifted like everyone else. We have a morning meeting that's usually in the Black Kite, which is the pub right off the center of our newsroom, and without the beer, usually at 9:30 every day. And anybody who's in the office can come by and come in. Well, now we shift every morning, and we have 20 to 25 people on a call in the morning that are going over the news agenda for the day, mostly on Google Meets is what we're using. But everybody's proficient in Zoom and other methods. Afternoon, the similar thing is happening. People are having people are going a little bit stir crazy. I haven't set foot in the office since the beginning of June, partially because I went to the States to drop off a teenager at university. But when I came back, I did my 14 days of quarantine with my bracelet and everything, and had it cut off, and finally was about to go into the office, and then we closed it down because there was a third wave spike. And we probably are going to start. We're allowing essential staff to go into the office these days with permission. We're going to relax that a little bit. So, your designers, your page designers who need big monitors to see, and clearly your graphic designers, video is easier to cut in the office. Although oddly enough, Matt Booth, my head of TV, says they've been more productive at home. I don't know how that works, but they've done a great job. It's forced us to figure out how to all communicate remotely. I think everybody's now almost an expert at it these days. You just roll out. I think the days are getting longer. It's harder to get away from this little machine when it's right next to you all the time. So I think there is some of that sets in. Anyway, it has been a challenge. We're looking forward to going back, but we know how this thing has behaved in the past, so we wouldn't be surprised if we have to slowly, retreat back to our home offices and do this all over again for months until there's a vaccine.
All right, so we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about the company direction. So Adrian, last year at N3, you shared plans to launch an international channel. Is that still the case?
No, unfortunately, the global economic climate is what it is. It's a really tough economy everywhere, no matter where you look. And the company has decided that the conditions weren't really conducive to going ahead with a venture like this. It's disappointing. We were really excited to have another platform, one that was truly global, but unfortunately, this just isn't the right time to try to roll something out like that.
Right, and I think there were some layoffs associated with that, and there are layoffs around the region, right, at media outlets. So back to Brian, you guys have cut pay for management and asked employees to take 3 weeks of unpaid leave. So what can employees do to ensure that they don't get laid off at this time?
Well, that was part of the plan to if we could get the company to agree to the unpaid leave, then we could stave off and shore up our books so that we'd be in a better position to manage our way through this. And we decided to do it early because it was important to get ahead of this, because we'd already had a tough news cycle for Hong Kong, and advertising dried up over the past year because of protests in Hong Kong, or at least I don't say dried up, but it certainly took it shrank. And then when we saw things start to come back at the beginning of the year, then this COVID-19 came. So we've had to, I'm obviously an editorial, and I listen to a lot of the conversations our business side is talking about. So we're fully aware, and we collaborate across the lines, because if they're going to do something that might impact editorial, we have to be talking to each other. And this collaboration, one of the things we're doing is we've realized that diversifying revenue streams is really important in this day and age. You can't rely wholly on digital advertising or print advertising. So we've, as you guys have probably seen, have launched a paywall. That was always on the cards even 3 years ago, but when we were starting out back then, we made a conscious decision to first grow the business and grow the audience, and then see how we could monetize it later. Later meant 3 years from now. After 3 years, we went from three, I think it was about 2.5 to 3 million unique viewers a month. We hit right when, and this is one of the things that's happened because of COVID, when it started to spread in the United States and become a massive story, suddenly we saw a spike. And we hit 50 million in March. and at any rate, we're moving forward with the paywall. It's started here recently, and I think other media, other events businesses, and other things are also being transformed by this process. I'll let some other colleagues dive in.
I think Adrian wanted to follow up on the layoffs.
Yes, actually, something that Brian said that actually I wanted to highlight is that, first of all, some trends you were already seeing in the industry have really accelerated as a result of this pandemic. I think that's true probably in a lot of industries, frankly. So diversification is really important. So even though there have been some layoffs, for instance, at NBC, at a number of different business divisions, at NBC News, we've also seen opportunities. So while we're not launching a global channel, the team that I manage, we're actually going to be expanding. We're going to be growing and adding a few more resources around the world. Some of these resources that we're adding at NBC News as well, domestically in the States, is also geared towards the digital properties. We launched a live stream channel, Peacock, over the summer. And of course, during a world pandemic like this, there's a lot of interest in the news. So there are a lot of opportunities to grow the news content and news coverage on a whole nother platform that is extremely dynamic. We launched a news property on a mobile app called Quibi. And the news content has actually done remarkably well consistently on this platform as well. So there are some opportunities. I kind of want to reassure the audience out there that while it is a tough time for the industry, I've noticed that what's happening is that the resources are being reallocated away from traditional broadcast and towards digital and live stream.
That's a great transition, because I wanted to ask, in these difficult economic times, is there any hiring at your companies? Tracy, Ken?
I'm happy to start. Bloomberg is slightly more insulated from a lot of these advertising company trends than a lot of other media companies. So we are lucky enough to be doing some opportunistic hiring at the moment. So that's been great. I just want to follow on briefly from what Adrian was saying. I think it's a really important point to recognize that all of the shifts and changes that we're talking about right now are really things that have arguably been in play for a few years now. And as she mentioned, we are seeing this crisis accelerate a lot of economic developments and trends that had been going on for a long time. For instance, the shift from brick and mortar retail over to online retail. And the same thing is happening for media. And I think what's really important for a lot of the audience here to recognize is that the changes we're talking about in reporting styles, in deploying resources, using more footage from people on the ground who are, they have their iPhones out and they're recording their own videos. Those are trends that have come into their own in 2020, but they're here to stay because a lot of them are basically cost-cutting measures. The industry is under pressure, and that's probably the model that we're moving towards.
Ken, is
I'm sorry.
AP hiring?
Yeah, we're still hiring. It's definitely slowed down, I think. I think after basically, it may be similar to everybody else. AP has adopted a very conservative sort of budgeting, look at the budget for the rest of the year. I can't remember, fairly early on in the crisis in March or April. We just sort of decided that we just needed to be careful because we didn't know what was going to happen. It was totally unpredictable. Would the economy go into some sort of global recession? What was going to happen? What's next? How long would this last? Kind of thing. And so I think we've been very conservative in spending in general. Some of that spending cut was natural because we couldn't cover things. Events weren't happening anymore that we would normally cover. But overall, we've become more conservative. And so on the hiring side, I would say, there's still, I don't have actual numbers. We have hired some people. I would say there are positions that we felt we needed to go forward with and hire for, kind of things. There are others that we thought were maybe more would be nice to have and that have been put on hold for the moment, kind of thing. So it's slowed down, but still continuing as needed.
Brian had a point.
Yeah, no, we're taking a very similar approach in hiring. We still are hiring. We've just got John Artman over as our tech editor, and are hiring some key reporting jobs that but as everybody knows, things have slowed down. We have been able to save money on the travel budget because travel right now is not something that people are doing. And when back on the point of the change in business, the events business has just been really had to be agile and change its model, because you can't responsibly put 250 people in the ballroom and have a luncheon thing on the stage anymore. We've had to do a China conference in our office with a green screen in the background, not with Jurassic Park behind it, but with a nice backdrop and that sort of thing. But without an audience, on just like we're doing right now, and you guys are trying to produce a quality product on very much different from one we were just doing 6 months ago. And actually, we've been having some good success at it. And I think everybody's getting good at these days. So but it was one of the areas where we've had to shift.
Yeah, I get emails about SCMP events, and I'm very impressed. I think panel discussions, you have people paying like US $100, okay, $65 maybe for just one panel, but $100 for something longer. It was like, wow, that's impressive. You really know your audience. So I think Adrian actually wanted also to talk about this.
Actually, more about the hiring that Tracy and Ken were talking about. I think one of the things that we're also finding, because of the reliance on local resources, because you can't travel easily, and certainly this is another trend that we've seen over the last few years really accelerate and intensify, is looking for journalists who have really good open source investigation skills. Yes, there's plenty of media out there, a lot of social content, which in turn means we have to be that much more rigorous about being able to vet, verify, and check that the content that we're taking offline is in fact the content that it purports to be. So in terms of the hiring and the sort of job opportunities, I would say if you have really good open source skills, you understand how to filter social media, you understand how to verify social media, that's a critical skill. And news organizations are looking for more people like that.
So in terms of hiring and this work from home era, does that new person you hire have to be physically based in a particular location, or we're just working online 24 hours, because we're all accessible now?
I can quickly address that from our perspective. I do find that you're seeing this interesting trend where maybe 20, 30 years ago, you would have, if you're a big news organization like NBC News, you had people everywhere in the world. I mean, Bloomberg is lucky. It has a very different business model. It does have a lot of different teams in regions that I'd love to have teams in. You saw a lot of our level of organization sort of retrench, and everybody would sort of get moved to regional headquarters or regional bases, and then, fewer regional bases. Now, because of the situation, there may be another opportunity to hire locally again directly, because you just don't know when you can travel. And combined with the very, what seems to be a political climate that is getting closer and more repressive, it is harder for journalists to enter a lot of countries. Visas are becoming difficult to get. So I think there is value in having people stationed remotely. I know your question was also about working remotely from home, but for us, we're also thinking about people working locally, because the borders are just closing, or they're closing and opening, and it's a lot harder to move people around to get the kind of journalism that Ken was talking about, where you really need to be in person sometimes to get that extra something.
So actually, that's a very good point you made, Adrian, and it's a good pivot, because we have talked about how difficult it is to get visas for journalists now here in Hong Kong, right? So we saw Chris Buckley of the New York Times. He had his visa for Hong Kong denied, and then Just yesterday, we heard that Aaron McNichols for the Hong Kong Free Press got his visa denied. So is this a worrying pattern of suppression of press freedom in Hong Kong? Tracy, what do you think? What can your company do?
Thank you for putting me in the firing line first. Appreciate that. There is concern about visas. I mean, obviously, even if it had nothing to do with press repression, the notion of journalists having to wait weeks and months in order to get certainty about whether or not they can complete their jobs is worrying. Our understanding is a lot of the delays that have been happening due to the coronavirus crisis and just a lot of officials who have been working from home, and that's delayed the application process. That's our understanding. But again, I would say there is general concern that there could be a new approach towards approving journalist visas. And we have seen some discussion in other media outlets about that, this idea that maybe journalists will have to go to a new office, that journalists are going to be more scrutinized than they have been in the past. It's a major concern.
So I'm seeing some audience questions. So for those of you who are listening from home, feel free to message on the Facebook discussion group or on YouTube, and the platform will pull it into our broadcast studio, and I will ask those questions in a few minutes. But back to the issue about press freedom. So Brian, with the new national security law in place in Hong Kong, how does that affect your network's work? Have you had
we had like everyone in Hong Kong, and it's not just the media that's reading this law. It's bankers and businessmen and schools, and everyone's has taken a keen interest in it. It's arguably the biggest legislation that's come in Hong Kong since the handover. So and it has clauses in it that do refer to press operations, and so we've had to take a very close look at it. We did note that it's a law that's aimed at national security, and it specifies 4 crimes. None of them have anything to do with journalism. There 3 of them involving violence or violent acts, and there is a reaffirmation of basic freedoms under the Basic Law in Article 4, I think it is. Freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. And so it is not called it's time to, or regulations to control the media in Hong Kong. It is called the National Security Law. So having taken that, all of that said, we took it very seriously. We've been reviewing it since. We've been watching all the developments. And we very quickly held a series of meetings with all our staff, just to small group sessions. So we gave everybody an opportunity to raise questions and concerns. We've heard about the visa questions. We have seen a slowdown. We don't know, like Tracy, if it's COVID-19 related. We think a lot of it is, but it's still worrying people. And even if it's COVID-19, to have your visa drag on for a really long time is really disconcerting. We've had to start people in their jobs in their home bases or before they moved to Hong Kong because of it. So we're hoping that, as we get through this 3rd wave, some of that good old Hong Kong immigration efficiency will be, as they go back to the office, will come in. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. I speak efficiency, but when my visas always came back in 4 to 6 weeks. That's all. That's my own experience. Anyway, but the other questions about how do I respond if police ask for my video or my notes, and can we run an opinion column on issues of secession or things like that. And we've been very, very clear to our staff. We want them to. The best response to this is to continue to practice a professional, fair, and balanced and objective journalism. If you're getting both sides of the argument in the story, if you're, as a body of work, if your opinion columns are all on one side, you're not doing your job anyway. You need to have a mix of voices and run the spectrum of the political commentary in order to try and balance out your own product and serve your readers. And if we start pulling back and not doing, waiting for the red lines or creating our own red lines on this, then we aren't doing our readers a service. So it's important to continue to push and just, we are working under the assumption that free press is still guaranteed under the basic law, and that hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. Ken, you live and operate in a region that's much more restrictive. Is there any advice or tips that you've learned from working in China that can be applied here?
I think the only advice is to be persistent and patient. I mean, I think as I think a lot of you know, the visa situation has always been challenging in China. It generally takes 2 to 3 months at least to get a new journalist approved to come work in Beijing or in Shanghai, anywhere in China. I think our current fear, which some of the other speakers have talked about, is that this kind of regulation will be extended in some way to Hong Kong. Maybe not at the same level, but at a certain level, and will just increase scrutiny of people coming and going into the country for reporting, for legitimate, what we consider legitimate reporting practices. I think all we do here is we try to maintain a good relationship with our foreign ministry handlers and stay in touch with them. The situation is very fluid here, and coronavirus has made it even more fluid. One thing, as most of you are probably aware, that China is no longer accepting applications for new visas, period. So anyone we hire, we can't bring them in, and when they will begin to accept visas for new people, we don't know, right? So if you hire somebody now, they might not be able to even apply for a visa until next year, and then wait the 2 or 3 months plus to get them to the country. So it's definitely a challenge, an operational challenge, but it's always been like that. And as I said, we just hope it doesn't extend to a sort of an intolerable extent into Hong Kong.
Yeah, Adrian, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. You have kind of a bird's eye view because you overlook all of these journalists around the world. What are you seeing happening here in Hong Kong? How does that compare to other regions, and what can we learn?
Sure. I mean, we've been watching Hong Kong very closely. We don't have a team permanently there, but we do travel there frequently, or we did before the pandemic really kind of snarled up the travel. I would say you haven't seen anything as extreme as Hong Kong play out yet anywhere else that we cover frequently. But you do see the political climate, as I mentioned earlier, getting harder and harder on journalists, certainly in parts of Europe. The Middle East is always a challenge for different reasons. I would say it's something that we are much more sensitive to. We did have a team, like many news organizations, in Belarus, for instance, and that has been a very challenging place to report, even before this, the protests, before the election took place. It's not a press-friendly country, and it just makes you that much sharper eyed about looking out for the sort of measures that governments are more willing to take against journalists. I think the Hong Kong situation is unique in that the national security law is it's not very specific and clear on the journalism part. And I think it's been very widely debated already. What are the implications if you are someone who has reported on China or the Greater China region, but you're not based in Hong Kong and you transit through Hong Kong, and maybe you've reported something that wasn't particularly flattering of the government in Beijing. So I think those kinds of concerns, those are all new to all of us. We're keeping a close eye, and we're trying to figure out what are the implications? Because it's constantly evolving, the situation, and we're learning something new every week about how the law is being applied.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to just wait and see. So I'm going to pivot to our audience questions, and there's an interest from Arden Bakalin to talk about work from home. So was fatigue or lack of energy in a work from home arrangement an issue to your co-journalists? If so, how were they able to overcome it? Tracy?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first part of that question? You cut out for a second.
Was fatigue or lack of energy in a work from home arrangement an issue to your co-journalists? If so, how did they overcome it?
Fatigue in work from home. Sure. So I think we've already discussed that one of the major downsides of work from home is that while you can work in your pajamas very comfortably, you will probably be working in your pajamas for longer than you would be otherwise at the office. And that's just a sort of reality of the situation that everyone I've spoken to has encountered at this point. People know you are working from home. They know you're not spending time commuting. They know you're probably not going out to bars and restaurants because you're not allowed to do so at the moment. So the only thing left for you to do is clearly to work, or at least be available for work communications 24/7. It is something that senior management at our organization is acutely aware of, and we have been trying to train managers and encourage managers to think of evenings and lunch times as a private time for their employees. And I think there is a genuine willingness and enthusiasm to do that. But the other thing that's happening at the moment is the sheer viciousness of the news cycle. When I think that it's August and we have all these things going on, it's not just that we're all working from home, it's that we are also in an unusually forceful news cycle. And that's one of the reasons that journalists at various organizations are working very hard at the moment.
Yeah, I'd just add, I'm going to take that best practice about managers encouraging lunch breaks and evenings as private time to heart, and we'll see if we can get that implemented at our place. I think some are obviously doing a better giving their staff a little more freedom. I've got an exercise bike in the back here that is helping, but it's hard to get 10,000 steps in a Hong Kong apartment, and I think everybody's up having this challenge right now, and yeah, definitely fatigue. I think even a partial opening of our office with masks and social distancing and all those things, I think people are actually looking forward to getting back and working with their colleagues. I have not set foot in the office since June, as I said, so it's by September it'll be quite a long time of working remotely.
Yeah, but thankfully things are looking up here in Hong Kong. We are opening up finally. Again, starting on Friday by steps, baby steps. Okay, so we have another question from Shamil Ibrahim, and I'm going to direct this one to Ken. So he says, regarding citizen journalism, especially in social media, how do we authenticate who's telling the truth, especially in the time of COVID?
Yeah, well, I think that's always a challenge, and we try to get the same story from more than one source for one thing, right? So you try to find corroborating accounts of other people who are telling the same story in talking about the Wuhan situation, whether it's the situation in the hospitals in Wuhan that were so overcrowded in the early days, and there were reports that there were sort of corpses lying in the hallways waiting to be carried away. It was such an overwhelming situation, and I mean it's a couple of things. One is, I mean, some people have a track record. Some people have been citizen journalists before, and you know and you have a certain level of trust in them. Again, it's corroboration. But I think the other thing is, when you put it out, you also say, we can't be there. We can't actually verify this 100%. you be upfront about this, that this is something we're putting out, and we're pretty sure we're 90. We don't put a percentage on it, but we think it's authentic. It looks authentic. It sounds it fits the storyline kind of thing. But just so you know, the AP couldn't independently verify this was actually the situation, and you just say that and be upfront about it, I think.
Okay, so this next question comes from Rebecca. She is our Hong Kong co-VP of the Asia chapter. And she asks, I'm going to direct this one to Adrian. What are you currently doing to invest and upskill your newsroom's talent pool? What skills do you deem are necessary for journalists to be competitive?
Right. So the investment part, we provide a lot of training all the time. It depends on what the role is in the newsroom, but there's always technical training because the technology is constantly evolving and there are always new tools that are being rolled out. In terms of the recruitment side of things, because we're a US-based company and the Black Lives Matter movement has had such a huge impact, a very positive impact, I would personally say, on how companies govern themselves when it comes to recruitment and hiring practices, and making sure that that their employees reflect what the wider population trends are, and making sure that there's a diverse population, full stop, in the newsroom, in our case. So we do spend a lot of time, myself, for instance, going to journalism schools, looking what the talent pool is around the world. I have a lot of colleagues in the States who do this more intensively in the US, again, because we're a US-based company. In terms of the skills, I would say they're still pretty much the same skills we've always looked for. And then there are some new skills. The traditional skills, I would say, the ability to tell a story, the ability to verify, to source original information, original stories, understanding who your audience is. The new skills, I would say, and I would add curiosity. I feel like curiosity is really, really important to have as a journalist. And I would also say, in terms of the digital, the new skills, it would be all the sort of typical digital skills, the ability to adapt to a changing industry, understand that you kind of have to be a jack of all trades, unfortunately. I'm the wrong end of this generation where, if you try to be a jack of all trades, everything suffers pretty much in terms of your skill set. But the younger generation, they have no problem. They really can excel at all the different skills. And again, it's knowing how to film, how to edit, how to photograph, how to write. But again, the reporting part of that arsenal is still very critical. Knowing how to interview, how to source, how to verify the people that you meet and the information they give you.
So this next question will go to Brian, and it comes from Jay Ganglini. He is asking, during the pro-democracy movement, during the protests in Hong Kong, the SNP has been accused of both being pro-government and pro-protesters in their coverage, depending on who you speak to. How do you react to such criticisms? Also, how important is it for a news organization to have diverse views and be as neutral as possible?
It's really critical, that second point. But first, if you're getting in Hong Kong's very polarized at the moment. This is true of even every dinner table, as to around the dinner tables in Hong Kong, they can be polarized. It's really important to get both sides of the argument into the story. Otherwise, you don't present a fair and balanced picture of what's happening. The point about yes, we came under fire. If you're coming under fire from both sides, I think this is when you say, okay, I'm doing my job, because as long as you're not getting all one side saying you guys are pro government and the other side saying you guys are pro democracy, then you have a problem, and you have to mix things up and really start looking at how your operations and how you're covering things. Yes, we get criticism from all sides. We get supportive messages from all sides, and so right now we're just hoping that to us is a sign that we're right in the right space. But for practicing fair, balanced, objective journalism, doing it as best you can under the pressures, as Tracy said, of this incredible news cycle we've had. Are you going to get a story wrong here or there, or are you going to be a little bit off somewhere? But you have to look at a body of work, and I think we've been right. It's been an uncomfortable spot, but right in the middle most of the time through this.
Okay, I'm going to open up this question to everybody. So feel free to jump in and pipe up. So this comes from Shauna Chen. She asked if there's any advice for recent grad entry-level journalists who want to break into the reporting field in Asia.
I'm happy. Oh, sorry. I'm happy to go first. But I think I would just reiterate, I think it was what Adrian was saying earlier about the importance of learning how to use social media. I mean, I'm afraid that a big chunk of future journalism skills are going to be both interacting with people on social media and through virtual communications like we are doing now, and also verifying the things that you see on there. So my big tip for developing yourself as a young journalist now is to get into the social media sphere, try to understand it. This is such a cliche, but start developing that personal brand so that people know you and they know what you're about and what you stand for, and then take it from there. Really try to get that social media experience as much as you can before you're hired.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question from Chi Sang Ying. What will be the impact of increased remote working from home on the size of your newsrooms and the balance between freelancers and staff writers in your newsroom? Brian uses a lot of freelancers, right? You want to answer that one?
Yeah, we have extensive. Part of the reason you hire freelancers is there are different legal and regulatory regimes in every city and country that you're going to. So, for instance, in the United States, when we set up our bureau there, we had to, go through setting up the rigmarole and the regulatory hassle of doing a bureau and incorporating and then examining the tax regime and all that sort of thing. So we do rely on stringers and freelancers from around the region. That's going to be a fact of life, whether there's COVID or not COVID, or working remotely or working from home. We don't see, preferences. We in our headquarters, we want to have staff workers, we want to have staff writers, we want to have people on staff, because it makes for better. If you belong to the company and you're a staff writer and you're part of the team and you're not someone who's pitching on a regular basis, then you feel that. We'd love to make everybody, even our freelancers abroad, staff if we could, but it's just the regulatory steps that we have to take are many. We're trying it in many places and are having limited luck, especially these days when everyone's distracted by all the challenges of everything else that's going on. But back to just on the hiring front, and there's one, we do have a cadet program that we had. It's an internationally competitive thing. We're going to do it again this year at the end of the year. People wanted to break into journalism. It's an excellent program where we first give a group of 5 or 6 cadets that come in. We give them training over the summer, and our group has just finished their training this past summer, and they are now rotating through the desks in the newsroom, and they're getting different experiences on different desks. And we're going to start the recruiting for that again in November or December. Our internship program was harder. We couldn't actually do it because COVID made it really difficult for people and bringing people in from many different places. The newsroom was ended up shut down, and because it was such a short duration, unfortunately and sadly, we were not able to engage our interns. We did have a handful, but not like our usual year. We're hoping we can bring them all back next year as well.
Okay.
But
so one
yeah.
last final question. I'm going to fold in Jia-Chong Liu's question into my own. So given what's happened in the last 8 months, what is the future of journalism? Ken, do you want to go first? We can't hear Ken. Oh no, did we lose Ken's audio?
I think we lost him. No, we lost his video.
Him.
Oh, he's back. Yeah, we've lost the audio on Ken.
All right, so maybe we'll go to Adrian as Ken fixes that. So Adrian, what do you think is the future of journalism?
Well, I think you're probably going to see more of the same of what we're experiencing right now, in the sense of, in a way, our industry, especially on the broadcast side, maybe underestimated how much we could do remotely, working from home. I mean, I would say actually the technical part ended up being much easier than we ever imagined. The challenging part has been some of the issues that the other speakers have mentioned, which is keeping morale going. How do you collaborate when you're not sitting in the newsroom together? Because collaboration is really fundamental to how we work as journalists. Journalism is also a creative profession, and creativity does happen really well when you're interacting in person with people, whether it's your colleagues or people you're meeting for a story and interviewing. I think figuring out how to do that effectively when you can't be in person is going to continue to be a challenge for us. I'm just kind of looking at the short term on the horizon. If we're talking longer term, I would say, again, some of the trends that we've seen over the last 7-8 months, we're going to see accelerate. There is definitely a pivot at the big news organizations in the US towards digital. They've always paid lip service to digital, but I feel like now there's real muscle and backing going into it. You can see this at Disney, at NBC Universal, over at a number of other news organizations and big US networks.
Okay, so we're running out of time. I'm going to give a few seconds to everybody else. So Brian, 15 seconds on the future of journalism.
It's going to be writing, knowing your audience, knowing your readership, using data to understand the digital landscape. Yeah, everyone, 3 years ago, we couldn't have done what we did. We were all on desktops, old ones in an older office. Everyone's on laptops these days. We're able to do this. We use our data every day on our story and our traffic to inform our decisions about coverage and when we're going to drop that story and how. That's the kind of atmosphere we're going to be working in just going forward. And you can do that working from home, we have discovered, but you can't really collaborate. You can't have fun, and it's hard to be joyful when you're by yourself. And so, as much as we try, anyway, we're all looking forward to working together again.
Okay, Tracy, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, sorry. What is the future of journalism?
Oh, thank you. I suppose it's doing more with
punchy.
Doing more with less. And to Brian's point, in order to do that, you're going to have to be very smart about how you go about it. You're going to have to be very analytical, and you're going to have to use data and the tools available to you, including social media.
Did we get Ken back?
Ken,
Can you
15
hear me?
seconds.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry
Future
about
of journalism.
that. So I would just say that working from home, we've learned a lot actually about how to work in different ways and creative ways, and to continue to tell stories, even though we aren't in the newsroom. We're not able to go out and interview people in the same way, and so I don't think that that's our ideal. That we want to go back to that, but I do think that that's in some way the wave of the future.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody back home, for spending your lunch hour with us. And thank you to our panelists, and especially Adrian, who had to log in at 6 a.m. from London. So thank you all very, very much for your time. And just some housekeeping notes from me. Please tweet and post this on social media, #N3Con2020. Our next panel is at 2:30, and that is on the Protest 4.0, how to cover social unrest. And that will be streaming on Facebook and YouTube. And if you want more conference from 2 to 2:30, we have a coffee break with Rebecca Ijawara. She's a reporter at S&P Global Market Intelligence. So head over there. She's doing a talk about Instagram for Dummies. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tracy, Ken, Brian, Adrian.
Thank you for moderating.
Have a good
It's been
day.
fantastic.
Thanks.
See you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.